The topics that are related to innovation in PPP, we are going to present them so that everyone knows us and understands what they have done. First, Cardona and Vice President of the Colombian National Infrastructure Agency, and an economist with a master's degree in economics. She has experience in teaching and research at the Universidad de los Andes and Universidad de Savannah, where she was chair of economic theory and currently Vice President of the National Infrastructure Agency. Thank you very much for being with us, Tamara, and Smart Cities Coordinator at the SUEZ Mexico office, and civil engineer who graduated from the Technological Institute of Higher Studies. She also has a master's degree at the Mexican Institute of Technology in Aguay. She began her career as a wastewater treatment officer in the state of Puebla and was later transferred to the technical team at the same department, where she worked at GET of infrastructure projects and also worked at the private companies of engineering focusing on the elaboration of water, sanitation, and drainage projects. Started working for SUEZ Mexico in 2019 as a project leader in charge of elaborating and planning strategic projects in the area of environmental services, and is currently coordinator of Smart City and consulting at SUEZ Mexico.
Projects and the development of digital transformation systems in water agencies. Currently, she's a coordinator of emerging cities in Mexico. And finally, José Calvo Caneiro, global leader of financial consultancy in IDOM. He's an economist and financial administration, and he has over 22 years of experience analyzing the feasibility and project structuring. He has also worked in IDOM since 2016, and currently he manages and oversees the financial structuring projects of APPs. He has carried out the analysis of a number of assets under concession, and he has analyzed infrastructure in different countries in Peru, Chile, Mexico, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Argentina, and Brazil. At the industrial level, he was part of a number of infrastructure projects to meet the needs of diverse industries like transportation, railways, highways, ports, real estate and industrial facilities, in addition to energy, telecommunication network, and hospital. Therefore, as I mentioned, thanks, Jose, for being with us. As I said, we have a top-notch planet, and we will see three aspects of innovation, because innovation is not only technology, it is not only innovation regarding new technologies or new ways of fostering infrastructure. Innovation is connected with government management, and Diana Carbona is going to approach this. She's going to tell us how the Colombian government, one of the government that has most experience in the development of PPPs, has constantly developed 3G, 4G, 5G, and what lessons have they learned after deploying these generations of PPP projects, and how they implemented them so they are prepared for future projects. Diana, it will be important to see your point of view from the government point of view. Tamara, as she works in one of the leading companies of water and sanitation in the world, she will talk about a sector where PPPs are not very common in Latin America. There are experiences in water. We could talk about the Bolivian experience in Cochabamba, especially, and the great challenges in order to deploy PPPs with water. And we can see the experience in Brazil with its new sanitation law, where we expect to see more PPP investments. Tamara will focus in specific innovation aspects like technology or a different way of seeing water, and she will talk about the reuse of water and how to face the implementation challenges.
Finally, Jose is broadly experienced with PPPs. And he's going to give us also a different overview. He's going to talk about energy, and it's also interesting to note how we can link the PPPs to the new systems of green hydrogen. Chile, for instance, is taking the lead in the region. And in Colombia, a couple of weeks ago, also presented a plan for investments in green hydrogen projects. And it's of course, still very early, at the very early stages, but it's also so timely to begin talking about these projects. So now I would like to turn it over to our panelists and ask what are the innovations of the Colombian government in terms of PPP project structuring, and how can these innovations be managed without affecting impacting bankability for such projects? Well, Ricardo, thank you very much, and thank you to all of you who are connected today. This is a very special day for us, and it's important to mention that Colombia has had many experiences and with these projects, especially in roadways. So when we're talking about innovation, we can say that we have innovated mostly in roadway projects, not necessarily with technology, but what drove us forward was the regulatory framework that was in place for PPP. So it was actually, we actually leapfrogged to the fourth generation of concessions, because by having a robust regulatory framework, these PPP projects were driven forward, and Colombia played a key role in developing such infrastructure projects under this contracting model. What have been the innovations in the fifth generation? Now, maybe it's worth sharing with all of the participants that are joining us in this important panel. As we are well aware, it is a long, a time-consuming process. We wish it would be faster, but it is actually something that requires feasibility studies. We need to actually find the partners and fulfill the requirements, the legal requirements. In Colombia, it might be a 4-year process before the project reaches the market. Once the project goes to market, we have maybe a gap between what we had agreed and what the concessionaire is granted. So maybe what is new and different and novel in the concessions contract is the fact that this contract actually enhances the social aspect of the projects, because we have included in our contracts the mandatory social investment that is, 0.5%, that's standard, of the capex of every project. It has to be allocated to social investments, because we were aware that when we had to build a roadway, for instance, that was in the PPP contract, many of the communities that lived near that roadway were against the project because they were not included in the project. We had to have something similar for the roadway. And maybe and the construction works could be actually halted, could be stopped. Of course, this is also part of the financial models in the contract and financial clauses, and the state will also pay for the social investments over the first years, at least. And to your question, actually, in regards to innovation, yes, the contract for the PPP Rio Mandalén project was very innovative. We have a broad experience with roadways, and it was the first time we had water system project in place. The Magdalena River is the largest river in the country, and it transports a lot of load to Cartagena, to Barranquilla. And yes, it was, we learned many things during the project. We have a standard contract for roadways. We call it standard because there's a general part of the contract that can apply to different projects, and we actually adopted that contract. And I should also point out we had the support of the IDB, and IDB invested in structuring and putting in place this contract, writing this contract that first was actually adapted to the waterway system, to the river system, and it would also provide guarantees and assurance to concessionaires and to the banks. Therefore, both concessionaires and those who invest their money, such as banks, would have the assurance as to how payments would be made, when they would be made, once the functional units would be completed. They have the payments that will be made once those units are delivered, and actually it's based on there's a component system. You have a box with very specific obligations, duties, and the concessionaire knows what their duties are. They have a formula to make the payments and to obtain the discounts too. And this is tied to something that was also innovative, which was a termination formula. We actually dropped the termination formula that we had adopted before in 4G and adopted a new formula looking forward rather than backward. And how does this actually work in the market? During the structuring phase, we are constantly communicating with prospects and banks. And banks also have received all the information they need. We explained what the project consists of, how they can be impacted with a termination clause, and we received their feedback to improve our contract and to go to the market knowing that the contract can be bankable, which is our ultimate goal. And this sums up what innovation has meant to us and the PPPs we've had with infrastructure projects. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting contribution in Colombia. Well, actually, what you've been doing in Colombia can be an example for other countries in Latin America. And the leadership of Colombia, well, gives it a privileged position to learn about other projects such as the Magdalena project. And, of course, these can be valuable for Colombia and for other countries as well. Tamara, and we were talking about water reuse just now, and I'm aware that this region faces many challenges in that aspect. We talked about Lima, the second driest city in the world, and the northern region of your country and the northern portion of Mexico also has water shortage. Chile also faces challenges in regards to water, and therefore reuse has been an alternative in some countries in seeking to address those challenges. And I would like to pick your brain a little and ask you, what are the key barriers for PPP projects to be deployed with these technologies, with water reusage projects? Thank you very much for your question. Thank you for inviting me. It is an honor to be in this panel with all of you. I would like to begin by saying that, yes, it's extremely important to talk about wastewater and reuse and how we can innovate. And, well, it's also very important to talk about reuse. Mainly these days, 80% of the wastewater goes back to the ecosystem without treatment, which can cause damage to the ecosystem and also, of course, be harmful for the water quality that is available. So when we talk about using wastewater, that's no longer an option. We need to join efforts to focus on PPP projects, so reuse can be available to all. There's a technical aspect, however, that we should consider for when talking about reusing wastewater, but through PPPs we can actually consolidate sustainable, innovative projects, and we can talk about the technology, know-how, and innovation provided by the private sector, whereas the public sector will make sure they will work properly and they will provide the guidelines to also promote equity. And, of course, there are obstacles and barriers that I will talk about now. First, you have the cultural barrier, and society in general will not accept these projects because they resist, well, to the idea that water supply will be outsourced, will be provided by contractors or third parties, and still it's a cultural aspect that produces actually lack of trust. And if we think that the population might think the water won't have the necessary quality, and I would say that it's very important to build awareness, to educate the civil society on how this wastewater can be used, and the different ways it can be reused, and so they will change their mindsets. It has to be a paradigm shift. There's also a financial barrier which poses an obstacle to collaborative projects in terms of reuse. Well, it's complex because when you can have different players and stakeholders involved, and the projects, well, might become very complex, and as Diana said, it's also important to innovate in this regard. There's also an institutional barrier that will hamper the effectiveness of PPP collaborations or projects if the public sector does not have a clear strategy in place to ensure transparency and accountability in their operations. It is likely that the efficiency or operating goals will not be attained. And with regards to reuse, continuity is mandatory because, well, resources and efforts are invested, and therefore it's key to reuse water properly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tamara. It's a very interesting challenge related to the legislation and in regards water reuse. And, well, the water, who owns the water? The municipality, the federation? Is it the responsibility of the federal, the state, or the municipal level? These are very interesting questions. Well, José, now let's move to green hydrogen, which is a trendy topic when we talk about energy these days. So what can you share about green hydrogen with us, and how would you say we can accelerate this technology, this new technology, this alternative technology in a region like Latin America? Thank you, Ricardo, for inviting me to this panel. Well, yes, I would begin by talking about the concept on green hydrogen. It's renewable fuel, and as well, it's not novel as an energy source. What is new is the process in bringing down carbon emissions. So you have a process that is novel. For hydrogen to make a significant contribution, it should be used in sectors where traditionally it has not been used, and there are opportunities for new forms of use going forward. So first, we would look at using green hydrogen in transportation. You have, of course, electric energy, which is not always effective. You have long loading times, and you have transportation, on not only on roadways but also railways. And in the long run, we can also talk about maritime transportation, and which could use hydrogen-based fuels. Secondly, we would talk about high-temperature manufacturing processes, such as the steel industry, that would no longer use natural gas or coal. Thirdly, we look at storage and network regulation, and green hydrogen can be used to store renewable energy, especially when we talk about production processes and renewables. Therefore, we can offset the seasonality with a storage system, but with renewable energy in urban centers. We can also use it in combination with natural gas, where we do have experience, and the most mature and feasible option is using it as raw material in manufacturing processes. Hydrogen is used in fertilizers, ammonia, methanol, and green hydrogen would also have many applications, as long as barriers such as cost and distribution are overcome. We would look at PPPs as a possibility. You have different possibilities to use green hydrogen, but we need to remove those barriers to see green hydrogen as a key element. And you can have, for instance, the strong sensitivity to the price of CO2. Cost is a key factor. Transportation, it's complex, costly, and also we need to look at storage. We do not have hydrogen transportation systems as we do for natural gas, and hydrogen is more complex when we talk about transporting and storage than gas. The consumption points, usage points should be also further developed, and pipelines can be considered. It would also be possibly transformed into green ammonia. And finally, the other barrier would be the technology. You have still developing potentials for hydrogen usage. And we are still actually in the learning curve. So we have PPP models that can contribute to accelerate the penetration of green hydrogen. Thank you very much, José. Well, hopefully we will be able to drive these projects throughout Latin America, because many countries are highly interested in projects like these. We will now have a second round of questions, as much as we're pressed for time. So, Diana, I think, or rather, I am aware that you have actually witnessed how things have evolved in Colombia, right, firsthand. And there is an interesting topic that is related to risk that we'd like to look into. And of course, it's vital for PPPs. What has the Colombian government done in terms of innovation to manage PPP risks, and what have been the results, Diana?
Ricardo, number one is what is important in a PPP is an efficient risk allocation. Without this, we wouldn't have a successful PPP. We would not have a contract that could be drafted in a harmonic fashion and that the contractor carries out the works in the contract. If there is no risk allocation, and this leads to contracts that cannot be that cannot end at time, and also controversies between the state and the contractor. In Colombia, it's key to have a framework to regulate risk allocation. And what is innovative and what have we learned is that risks become dynamic. There are risks that, due to their nature, can be applied to a PPP of any type of transportation, or by and large, other type of project that would be the regulatory risks because of state matters or tax changes. We have a number of tax changes regularly in Colombia. Any project with private investment, we can allocate them when the same. When we're talking about transportation, they need special treatment, and this means that we should see in details what product, is it river flow, if it's airport, if it's railway airport, and the singularities of each project has been, and with an efficient risk allocation. This is why in the past year, with the help of other entities of the Colombian government, we have been able to distribute risk efficiently for each transportation mode. And there is something important when I mentioned that risks are dynamic. They are so dynamic that last year we had a great package of projects to be contracted, and we were making progress in the paperwork, and the pandemic created a mobility risk restriction, and there are reasons of force majeure that force citizens in any state or country should remain in their houses without going out. This for PPP projects where what they need well, here the income came from highway tolls, and this creates a risk. And this risk had to be included last year in the contracts that were under executions, as well as the contracts that we were analyzing. And at the end, I believe that something important about the risks, that is something that should be analyzed, and there is a lot of room for improvement and many lessons learned in order to improve. And this happens in Colombia. I don't know if in other places this happens. In Colombia, there is a distinctions when projects come from the private initiatives or when they come from the public sector. This could be a mistake because you cannot think because a private presents a project to the state, they can take on more risks than what they can bear. I believe that risk allocation should be symmetric. If it's a project of a PPP of public initiative or a PPP of private initiative, it should be dealt with the same way. And this is something that we should focus on from here on our future projects in the country. Well, to end what we did and what we have done in terms of risk innovation, we carried out the risk allocation for river projects, for airport projects, for railway projects, and also roadway projects came from risk allocations of years ago, and we included mobility risk. And I believe that this is something that the pandemic showed us that we had to do, and this will be embedded in the future contracts. Interesting, Diana, and it is important for the governments to be flexible, to change their structures, and to adapt to reality, to prevent that bankability and the attractiveness of the projects for this public sector. We wanted to maintain and we wanted to continue evolving based on the past and lessons learned. Tamara, we were talking about Bolivia. We were talking about the case of Brazil, lights and shades of water and sanitation in our region. What is missing in Latin America to drive the development of the PPPs and the operating agencies? How do you see this from SUEZ? Well, thank you, Ricardo. My first recommendation, or the first key point, and we believe in this strongly in SUEZ, is the importance of revaluing wastewater to foster actions and investments that add financial and technical value. Something in the past it was considered waste to revalue residual sludge to be fertilizers, to restore eroded soil, and to add value to the structure and to the financial structures behind the reuse, like the purple lines. And also to put on our radar wastewater as strategic asset to make decisions. In SUEZ, we faced the pandemic and we worked with the epidemiology of wastewater that allows us to monitor the presence of the virus in wastewater. And on the other side, not least important, the reinsertion of wastewater to the integrated cycle of water, the reinjection of water in aquifers. And what is also missing is to see our collaboration structures and match them with the public sector that are based on circular economy, that they should be technical and financial models that go towards sustainability with an increase of life of that can benefit the future generations. We believe in this line of thought, and we've worked with sanitation projects with circular structures where we use treated water and we also use the byproducts of these processes in order to make energy. So this is a great opportunity, and I believe that this can revolutionize the Latin American countries. I also believe that it is important to talk about in Latin America about being heterogeneous and how the water is distributed institutionally and geographically. Over 30% of the population of Latin America live in areas with less than 32% of water resources, and in Latin America we have a problem of water that is leaked. 50% of our water is lost through leaks. So there is a road to follow. We need new business models like technology. We have to change paradigms in the regulatory frameworks that allow us an array of collaboration possibilities. And what is also missing is to look inside and contextualize the water projects. Now, when we see the cultures of the region, in order to implement a customized project for water. And at last, it is very important to work, and in SUEZ we believe in this, that is the inclusion of technology and water management. This can generate more controllable, more measurable environments, and we can make intelligent decisions, because with this we will have good accountability by and large. I believe that the implementation of technology allows us to have technical efficiency of the project, but the transparency in their management and therefore the collaboration between public and private sector become thriving. Now, the core is in the efficiency of the infrastructure, the rollout of technology, and also to observe laws and also the different policies. But I believe that the essence of PPPs in water should be the benefit to the well-being of the inhabitants. I believe that water is an instrument of peace, and our collaborations between public and the private sector should focus on this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Jose. I believe that we will end with this question because of time. Now, talking about green hydrogen and the PPPs, what can markets and developers expect of the transition of green hydrogen in the PPPs? So you've already mentioned how we can use green hydrogen. What do you believe is happening? What are you observing? So thank you, Ricardo. This is an interesting matter. On one side, I talked about the green hydrogen and positioning it, and how are we going to find in the market that is connected to the use of green hydrogens in terms of PPPs. I believe that in the midterm we will be able to see interesting opportunities, because the PPPs follow the needs or the elimination of barriers regarding green hydrogen, like the high cost, the convergence of transportation system, and technology, because of the flexibility and innovation that these PPPs contribute. We can define a number of targets that we want to achieve, and also wait for innovation from the private sector to see how we will achieve the target. And this is important when we are before developing technology, and it is important to see what the private initiative provides us, because they can propose PPPs where they can use their experience, innovative capacity to deal with challenges, strategic challenges of the country. How are these projects going to be developed in the future, and what are we going to find? I believe that in the first stages, and according to what happened with other technologies like solar photovoltaic, can you remember the beginning? We had very similar problems. It was high cost, not very efficient, not very mature technology, and all of these weaknesses were eliminated with a combination of a public incentive, with the development of demonstrating projects and pilot projects that contributed to increase these technologies. I believe here that we have something similar. We will have PPPs geared toward developing pilot projects. One could be driving the offer. This is when we're close to the maturity point, like transportation. We're starting to see this, and we will see PPPs for the development of green hydrogen plants to drive with green hydrogen, municipal public transportation means. And we will have fleets that will be renewed. This is something that is emerging, and we see a future potential. We could start developing high capacity pilot plants with the income that come from non-public use. They start as public demand, but we encourage so that there is an incremental offering. Another thing connected to the hydrogen PPPs to develop cores of green hydrogen as the problem is distribution. We can have PPPs geared to create clusters. Like, for example, we could have a PPP to develop an industrial area focused on hydrogen. The private part can develop infrastructure, supply, and distribution. They develop the cluster, and they will receive incentives. And the public sector will allow to help them. Something that we see in the international level, we could have pilot projects of production and distribution of hydrogen in urban areas for domestic consumption, where the private participant will be in charge of the residential application. But this is something that we will find in the future, and we will see a second family of projects that would be associated to the network development. Here we could even find PPP projects for the development of transportation and storage networks that are neutral, like what we do when you develop networks in wide area. We could use a network of shared use, and this is something that we are seeing in a number of countries when they deal with their hydrogen strategies. And here we're talking about shared business models in terms of cost, or the development of storage networks in key areas like ports or railways. Now, all of these projects, I believe that we are going to they will have an important role in the development of green hydrogen and the elimination of barriers. And the markets and the structures have an important role to define correctly the distribution of risk and the compensation model to compensate the market. This is important, and we need and which countries will position themselves in this energy option that is very relevant. And it's interesting, you showed us how we can use the PPPs in this case. This is interesting and enriching for people that are watching us in São Paulo or in their offices. And in order to conclude, I would like to mention a couple of points after listening to you and your views. Now, the PPPs traditionally ways that governments find to postpone their investment in infrastructure and transfer this to the private sector, and they become long-term projects. But the advantage of the PPPs go beyond this, and one of them, and we're talking about innovation. I think that we should leverage these PPPs as tools, not only when we see the financing themes, but also to improve the value for money of the projects, to improve the public services that the state offers, and also to maximize the expertise of the private sector and companies when it comes to using new technologies. On the other side, we were also talking about government innovation, and it is how governments have to innovate and adapt themselves in order to respond to the realities that we have and to maximize the benefits for governments, but benefits for the private sector. So I believe that this is one of the great blessings of the PPPs when we think about innovation. Now, from the IDB Invest, I am in charge of the consultancy area in PPPs. The private sector talks about innovative matters, and they talk about strategic matters for countries, and we do help companies to present these type of projects to government, and with the IDB we help governments, like in the case of Madalena, to structure bidding processes. It is very interesting to learn your points of view. I do thank you for participating in this panel. It has been a great pleasure to talk to you, and For all of you that are in your offices, it's a pleasure to be with you. To Brazilians, I do apologize for not speaking Portuguese. I hope that this was a useful panel for you, and thank you very much.